Hello everyone, my name is Jenny Berry and we are here at the OSU Alumni Center today. I'm thrilled to introduce to you author of the best-selling Jack Reacher series, Mr. Lee Child. Hi Lee, how are you?
I'm good, Jenny. How are you?
I'm good. It's great to have you here tonight.
Well, thanks for the invitation. This is good fun.
Good. How's OSU treating you so far?
Excellent so far, yeah. Weather's a little cold, but it's a beautiful place and I'm having fun.
Good, good. Glad to hear that. All right, well, if you're ready, we'll just jump right in.
Go for it.
All right, so Lee, what inspired you to begin writing?
Well, you know, the truth of the matter is simple unemployment. That's the answer. I had a career in television, and it was a really great broadcaster and a great producer. We made fabulous shows. We made Jewel in the Crown, Brideshead Revisited, Prime Suspect, Cracker, some great documentary and news. And I loved it, and no doubt I would still be there, except that one day my boss said something to me that made it just impossible for me to continue. He said, "You're fired." It was one of those 1990s things that it was happening all over the world, obviously not just to me. All over the world, people were getting thrown out of work because the employer had realized they could get much younger, cheaper people to do the same work, or computers and so on. So I loved entertainment. The whole idea that I could do something that gave somebody else happiness just for a day or an hour or whatever it was, that's really been the whole basis of my career. And so I thought, all right, television is gone. What can I do next? And all my life I'd been a huge reader. So I thought, you know, there's not that much difference between the sort of book I write now and the sort of TV I used to make. Different medium, obviously, but very much the same proposition. So I thought I'll try writing a book, see what happens. And I got a 2-book deal first time around, and I thought, great, that's 2 years before I have to get another job. And now book number 23 has just come out, so I'm thinking maybe I'll never have to get another job.
So what was that shift like from network television to novel writing?
The fundamental difference was some of it was good and some of it was bad. The bad side was it's very lonely compared to television, which is such a social thing. You know, you're always working with a crew, a bunch of really smart, intelligent, bright, funny young people. And being a writer, you're working with nobody. You know, you just sit there alone for months writing a book. So the loneliness part was the downside. The upside, conversely, was in television, even if you did something great, you couldn't really take credit for it because 100 other people were working on it. If it was lousy, it wasn't really your fault because 100 other people were working on it. And so there was that slight feeling of detachment, whereas writing, it is totally down to me. Obviously, there are editors and publicists and marketing people and booksellers and reviewers and all those things, but fundamentally, the writer is responsible. And so the connection is a lot greater. If somebody enjoys my stuff now, I do take credit for it because that's my work alone.
So what was the process of getting your first novel published? You said you had a 2-year deal. Was that difficult to get that signed and published?
Well, you know, it is statistically difficult, yeah, because most people don't get published, or if they do, the book doesn't work all that well. So statistically, yeah, it's quite difficult, but the proposition is quite easy, that the publisher wants to have a success. And so if they think the book is good, then they're totally 100% enthusiastic about it. So you've just got to write a book that somebody's going to think is good. Which happily they did. They thought my first book was good, so they thought, all right, we'll put a toe in the water, we'll get 2 books from this guy, and we'll see what happens. The wrinkle with that, though, really, is that was then. You know, my first book came out in 1997, and therefore I started this process around 95. And the publishing landscape was completely different then. The horizon was a lot longer. People were prepared to say, okay, here's a guy with some kind of promise. We'll put 5, 6, 7 years into it to try and make something happen. But that doesn't happen anymore. You know, now you're lucky to get 1 year or 2 years. The horizon is that much tighter.
So for you, what has been the most challenging aspect of being a writer?
you have this strange imbalance between you're doing it, the whole purpose of doing it is to please the readers. But if it's working happily, you got a lot of readers. You know, you got so many readers that you can't individually consider them all. You know, there are just too many, it's too intimidating. And of course, people are so different that something one person likes is going to be different from what another person likes. And so the challenge really is just to, and this sounds completely weird, but the challenge is to ignore the readers. You've got to just write from that, whatever that original instinct was that made you write the first book, you've just got to preserve that. So essentially you're writing for yourself, even though millions of people are going to read the book.
So what is your preferred writing style, or how would you describe that?
Well, it's such a luxury because, you know, television was 24/7 and you were sometimes working all night or late in the evening or early in the morning. So the big luxury for me is I work when I feel like it, which is never in the morning. I have a firm belief that nothing of value is ever achieved in the morning. So I start around lunchtime and just work the hours that I want, and that really is a great luxury.
Is it ever difficult to motivate yourself to get up and do the work?
Well, not really, because you got to be sort of cold-blooded a little bit. You know, this is this is not an airy-fairy thing. You've got to do the work. You know, you can't sit around and wait for the muse to strike, because it never will. You know, you'll always find something else to do. So you just got to do the job like it was an actual job. You know, you show up, you sit at your desk, even if you don't feel like it. You might have a lousy first half hour, but then you get into it. Same as anybody else's job.
Do you feel that since you began writing, your style has shifted at all?
That's a really good question because, you know, I try not to shift it because, again, I think when you write a series, what the reader is really looking for is reliability, familiarity, the comfort of getting back into something that they've loved last year. And so that you need to keep it as similar as you can. But of course, the writer himself is changing year on year. So it's like a river, you know, you can never jump into the same river twice because the water is different and the person is different. So I think it has evolved, definitely. I remember at the beginning, I wanted to kind of stake out a voice or a style. And so I had, and the character seemed to me to be not inarticulate, but just unaccustomed to speaking. You know, he wasn't a voluble, chatty type of person. So I wanted a voice that was very distinctive, and I used very short sentences and sentence fragments just to try and establish the character of this guy. And I think over the years, I've been able to afford to relax a little bit about that, just move back into slightly more lyrical structures and longer sentences. Now that the character is well established, I don't have to keep beating people over the head with the fact that this is a very taciturn and silent guy.
So speaking of Jack Reacher, you mentioned that you recently published your 23rd novel. So how do you keep that storyline alive, and how do you keep the character of Jack Reacher alive? What inspires you?
Well, I took a very lucky decision at the beginning. I mean, it was part of his characterization, part of the whole scenario, but he has no job and no home. He's ex-military, and he has never really settled down in civilian life. He can't stop moving. He needs to just wander about all the time. And he did not get another job. He just lives off his wits, looking at America, you know, all the highways and byways. And that decision gave me fantastic flexibility because he can be anywhere, literally, and do anything. You know, the new novel, Past Tense, is set in New Hampshire. Reacher is just wandering through New Hampshire. He could show up in Oklahoma, he could show up anywhere. There's no reason why he has to be confined to one particular place or one particular type of issue. Because, you know, a lot of thriller series or crime fiction series are fundamentally soap operas, either location-based or employment-based or both. Maybe the guy's a cop in LA or a private eye in Chicago or whatever, which is great. Those books are fabulous. But 23 books doing the same stuff in the same city, that would have been a big challenge, I think, just to keep the interest in myself. And if I'm bored with it, obviously the reader will be bored with it. So the flexibility of the Reacher scenario was it was necessary for the character, absolutely, but it's a gift that just keeps on giving because it can just be anywhere, associated with anybody. Some of the books are lonely little no-account towns in the middle of nowhere. Some of them are set in DC with the White House and the FBI and all that kind of thing. So the flexibility is what saves me.
Because it is so flexible, do you feel that you ever experience writer's block, or is that not really an issue because you do have so
I
much
think
freedom?
writer's block is one of those, it's a sort of polite way of saying I just can't be bothered today, It's what I think one of the unique things about being a writer is that you've got to believe several things at once, but you don't believe them like 50-50. You've got to believe each of them 100%. And you have to believe that, yes, it's an absolute craft, it's a joy, it's art, it's creative, it's a magnificent tradition that stretches back centuries, all that good stuff. But it's also a job, it's a profession. So what I always say to myself is, don't be so pretentious about it. Does a nurse get nurse's block? Does a truck driver get truck driver's block? I mean, obviously there are days when they don't want to go to work, they would rather stay home, but they can't. So you go to work, you get into it, you do your job, and you warm up within an hour or two, and you're right into it. And it's the same thing for a writer. So I really don't believe in writer's block. It's just a kind of two-word excuse for being lazy or disorganized,
So what role have libraries played in your journey as an author?
Oh, complete. I mean, just total. That's why I love to do events like these because, absolutely literally, libraries enabled my life, in a lot of ways created my life. I grew up, I'm not going to say poor because we were we had shoes and we had 3 meals a day, but we had no money. We were no worse off than anybody else. This was post-war austerity in Britain. So there was no possibility of ever buying a book. So the library was absolutely a lifesaver. Plus, back then when I was a kid, horizons were so narrow. The idea that you would ever actually go anywhere or travel or see the world was ridiculous. So your only access to it was through books, and your only access to books was through the library. And for me, literally, they created my life. So I would do anything for a library.
That's wonderful. And I feel like a lot of people have a similar experience with libraries, and it allows them to, like you said, broaden their horizons. Do you feel that libraries also play an important role in your readers' lives?
Oh, certainly, yeah. I mean, libraries are facing huge challenges now, in as much as, what are they for exactly? When there's so much stuff available online, what is their exact role? There still clearly is one, but they're all trying to find out exactly, which direction to go. What is it that people need? But a repository of knowledge is what a library really is, and it can be facilitated either through the physical book or computer terminals in the library for people that can't afford it. Because, don't forget, the income and wealth disparity is so great that a lot of stuff that regular folk take totally for granted, like we all have a phone, we all have a laptop or something. Some people don't, some people just physically don't. And if they're marginal economically, they probably don't even have a bank account or a credit card, so they can't even get online or buy things or download things online. So the library as a community asset is still hugely important, and they will figure out a role going forward. And it will be, I'm sure, different, but as vital as it always was.
So with that changing role of libraries, and I think everybody can agree that the media just completely saturates our everyday lives. And with that readily available media, I mean, people can go online and download an ebook or free books sometimes. How has that change your role as an author? What helps you to stand out in that saturated world?
Oh, that's very tough. I mean, what helps me is that I started before all that happened. You know, my name became established before that chaos and noise of the modern marketplace really established itself. So I'm a lucky survivor from the recent past. People starting out now have got a huge issue with simply being discovered. Because I believe that at the moment, if you go online to either one of the big book distributors or Amazon or somebody like that, there are 16 million titles currently available. And to stand out one person amongst 16 million, how do you do that? And everybody thinks, oh, well, social media, promotion, this and that, but everybody's doing that. And if everybody's doing it, it's kind of the same thing as not doing it. So it is a big, big problem. And the first person, if it was me or if it was you, the first person to figure out the answer to that is going to be a billionaire.
I agree. Do you foresee any other changes in the industry?
I think there's a certain amount of consolidation because of those economic pressures that you were just talking about. The instinct is to agglomerate. And I think even 20 years ago, or certainly 50 years ago, there were literally hundreds of big publishers. Now there's only 5, whereas there are still a couple of thousand or 3,000 what they call micro presses or small presses. But they really have the same problem that any individual author has. How do they get noticed with all this, noise? And it's not just 16 million book titles, it's also all the other media that didn't exist when I was young. There was nothing to do apart from read a book. Now, there's 100 things to do apart from read a book. And a lot of them are great, a lot of them are real fun. And so the idea of saying to somebody, reading a book is important and reading this particular book is super important, that's a huge challenge.
So shifting a little bit, you recently came out with an album and collaborated with Jen Smith, and I think it's kind of based in Reacher's world. What did that collaboration look like?
It was such fun. I mean, it was a great thing, and it was a lovely story that we were each fans of each other before we ever met. I mean, I was a secret fan of their music because I discovered it. They were a fan of my books. And then we sort of found out about each other, actually, and sort of met. And we were always talking about we should do an album. I mean, I can play a little bit of music, but not really very well. So the idea was I would write the lyrics, they would do the music. And it took us actually 15 years to finally get it together, but we did. Starting last year and this year, we wrote the songs, we made the album. Last night I was in Houston, Texas. We played a gig together. The week before we did one in New York, and it has just been such fun, total bucket list thing, make an album. Who'd have thought it? It's a dream come true.
How exciting.
Yeah, it really was.
Well, Lee, is there anything we should be watching out for in the future from you?
Well, Reacher has been, there have been 2 movies with Reacher, with Tom Cruise playing the character. And I like Tom. I mean, he's a really nice guy, and we've had a lot of fun. And I've really enjoyed working with him. But the readers are mad about him because he's too small. Reacher is a giant. Reacher's a huge, physically intimidating man. If he walked in here now, we'd all go, ooh, a little worried. And for all Tom's virtues, he doesn't really have that physicality. So I've decided that we won't do a 3rd movie. Instead, we're going to move it to streaming television. The long season, maybe 10 or 12 episodes per story, so that it can be binge watched. And seems to be the obvious thing to do now. The original movie deal dates back a long time, and streaming television wasn't invented yet. So movies were the thing to do. But now, if you're doing a deal, I think you instinctively think of television first, which is kind of the opposite of what it used to be. So I'm making that move, and so the actor will need a new actor because Tom doesn't act on television. So we're going to have a new actor that hopefully the readers can participate in choosing I hope, so they can feel they've got the right guy.
Well, how exciting. I'll
Yeah.
have to keep an eye out for that.
Yeah.
But it's been great chatting with you, Lee.
Well,
Thank
yeah,
you so much
thank
for
you so
being
much.
here with
Yeah,
us.
real pleasure. Thanks.
Thanks.